All right. One quick sec. All right. Good afternoon. My name is Adolfo Romero, and I'm here on behalf of the Simon Proctor Oral History Program. And I'm here with my colleague, Bryanne Ruiz from UCLA, joining us on behalf of the Latino Politics and Policy Initiative. Today is October the 8th, 2021, and I have the pleasure to be with Mr. Carlos Barberena, who is joining us as he is running for the 2022 election to the U.S. Senate to represent Florida. Mr. Barberena, Carlos,
Yes.
Would you like to begin our interview by asking our narrators to talk about their childhood, where they grew up, just a little bit of history? Would you mind telling us a little bit?
Sure. Let me forewarn you, I have a propensity for diatribes, so feel free to cut me off at any time. I'm Nicaraguan born. We arrived in 1980, December of 1980. I was a couple months old, had just reached 5 years old. I struggled a lot because at that time, the Maria El boat lift was in July. And, we and my sister and I were literally the only Nicaraguans in school, for several years. So even the Spanish that we spoke was completely different. I'm an introvert, if you could believe that. So I struggled with that a lot. It took me some time to learn the language. To me, I still haven't mastered it. My parents, weren't anything other than just the regular working class. They worked hard enough to put us into good neighborhoods. And I was fortunate to attend, some of the, not the best public schools in Miami, but some of the better ones. Throughout my education, my entire education is all through Miami-Dade Public County Schools. I didn't have the opportunity to go to college, and I think that was my first experience with the machinations, the system. I had to work to help provide for my family, and in doing so, I was denied financial aid, and that really stung me, and it fueled an anger in me that to this day it's still taking me some time to get over, right? I don't think you really realize how much your childhood really affects you until, honestly, it's too late. So you fast forward, I've been fortunate, to get into technology. I ran into a friend. At that time, it was right before the millennium. He had explained that Microsoft had released the new certification track. I had programming with him in high school. I took it, and I was certified. I was out of a class of 16. I was the only one who was certified by the time it was done. And I got into the information and technology sector. I was fortunate that I landed with some really good projects. I spent some time with Bank of America. I worked with HP. But above all, I think the projects that really set home for me were, I did some government projects. I did the Social Security office. I was hired for, and I think this will allow me to segue into one of the things that the industry faced that was catastrophic in my opinion. So I had just been hired by EDS, with Ross Perot's company. They developed Amadeus, which is a reservation system for the airlines. There were 14 of us that were hired to be basically the network engineers. It took 2 months to pass literally all the requirements, all the background checks, the FBI, all that stuff. And we were in training when September 11th happened. Because we had access to the back end of the network, they cut the project. I said, listen, right now we don't know what's going to happen with the industry. And that was my first experience with the collapse of the industry. There's really nothing we can do about it because, I don't think anyone imagined a plane being flown into, the tower. So after that, I decided to, try to figure out what I was going to do. And I found myself doing a couple projects. Technology has always afforded me the opportunity to get back on my feet. Through that, I ended up on a long-standing project after that with Bank of America. I got married. My daughter was born. Right before my daughter was born, it was week 39, and they wanted to send me to another state, and I wasn't able to go because my my ex-wife was in week 39, and I said, look, she's about to be born. Like I want to be there, and I was laid off. So here I am at home with, a few month old unemployed. I ran across a medical billing course and I decided, hey, I'm going to buy it. And that basically ushered me into the next 8 years of my life. I actually I founded a medical billing company. Then I opened up a general practice. By the time I was 30, I had made my first million. I had, in my opinion, reached the pinnacle, the American dream, especially for an immigrant, an uneducated one for that matter. All I have is a high school education. And it went well. I was doing really, really good. But the petulance of youth, right? I always say that I had $1 million and I spent it all. I literally got my master's in business with that. But more than anything, it exposed me to a lot of the systemic problems that we still see today. Technology for healthcare at that time, when I was involved in medical billing, they were still doing faxes, and we're talking about the early millennia here, and it was just outstanding that they were so far behind. And I got to see a lot of the abuse that happens because technology wasn't properly implemented. Fast forward after that, I lose my business. Right before the collapse in 2007, I was hemorrhaging money. I went from a hero to a zero really quick. That was really an eye-opener for me. More than anything, it really shaped who I am today, because it fueled my anger more than anything, because I did make some mistakes, but more than anything, it was a product of the industry. At that point in time in Florida, the abuse was rampant. And, what's a 30-year-old guy, right, especially a Hispanic, owning such a successful practice? And United Healthcare hit me with two random audits, and it just put me out of business, completely put me out of business. And that devastated me because I lost it all. And I got sick. I ended up getting shingles twice at 30 years old. And it really made me take a step back and take a look at what I wanted to do. So I said, I'm done being a business owner. I went back, landed a couple IT jobs, and that's how I ended up in the automotive industry. October of 2020 would have been my 10th year anniversary in the auto industry. I knew that the industry was headed for, the crash. I was in it right after Cash for Clunkers, which was a phenomenal success. It helped rebound the industry, and we rode the wave. I ended up working on a project for Nissan North America, ultimately working the entire state of Florida. The job was great because at the time I was divorced, I had young kids, and it afforded me the opportunity to really be there for them. So I loved every minute of it. I worked for one of the best companies I've ever had the pleasure to work with in my life. It's Marriage. They taught me everything about service and retention. And one of the things that I noticed while I was, in my tenure in that industry was that throughout this whole time with communications and technology, people were yearning for that touch, that human interaction. At that time, emails were still a thing when I first started in the industry. By the time I left, it's like, who opens an email anymore? Right? So the industry started to get back to picking up the phone and calling and creating a way to how to retain that customer. That said, you don't have to have an MBA in business to know that, all good things come to an end. And by 40, I had my midlife crisis because it was 2015, and I started to worry about the industry. At that point in time, a lot of the manufacturers already started making cutbacks. So here I am, I'm 40 years old, and panic really starts to set in because I see my young kids, I have this really good job, not wealthy, but they have a life that I never had, which is, I think that, our responsibility as parents, sometimes I think we go a little further than what we're supposed to. So I started to worry about that. What happens if I do lose my job? Who's going to hire a 40-year-old, immigrant with a high school education? And that really set me off on a period of more than anything self-discovery. And I think the biggest lesson that I learned was how important my mental health was to me, especially in the Latino community. Boys don't cry. the patriarch and that, Latin, macho, bravo, bravado. It just, I can remember crying. I remember crying as a kid, but as an adult, it just that's something that you do, and it made me inherently flawed, right? And I had to take a look at who I was and what I was going to do to become a better person, so that I could provide a better opportunity for my children. And when I started to look at that, I just started to look at everything. I am a data file. I'm a total nerd. I've been blessed that I read pretty quickly and I retain the information. And it was a Pandora's box. I got into reading several books on psychology, and that really was the eye opener for me. What are causing these systemic failures? What's happening, right? We can blame the government. We can always point the finger, basically is what I'm trying to say, right? And for me, it was, I have to make the change. And in order for me to succeed, if I don't change myself, then I'm never going to be able to do that. And coming from someone that was an introvert, my hands used to get, clammy when, a good-looking girl would come by. And literally, people can't believe that I was that much of an introvert. I've always kind of rehearsed conversations, right, because of the fear and the anxiety that would set in. So I'm kind of more prepared when it comes to conversations, but it's not because there's an inherent gift. It's because my anxiety and my OCD, gets me so worried that I'll rehearse something 10 times over. And how am I going to turn a negative into a positive? And that's ultimately, how I got down this path. It did, have several covariates that helped me get to it as a hobby, because I was doing digital marketing for automotive industry. I started developing websites. And when I say developing websites, I'm not talking about developing, I'm talking about WordPress sites. And even in that industry, I noticed that there's a huge disconnect between the technology that's available and the technology that we have in our hands. And being a product of the 80s and the 90s, when, AOL, modems and all that, I vividly remember Bill Gates saying that when, everybody was complaining about Windows, it was like, guys, I'm waiting for you guys to catch up. It's the hardware. And when you take a look at it, hardware is cost prohibitive. But because it's cost prohibitive, corporations, the government, they're not updating their systems. And I think now more than ever, we as a society are starting to feel the ramifications of that. And when you take a look at specifically, when I took a look at how, what could I do to help? I think the average age in, the Senate is 60, almost 70 years old. These guys claim to have an idea of technology, but they don't. They really have none. Get some of them to even do a proper Zoom meeting. Now, did I think that this was the path that I wanted to do, to run for Senate? No, but I felt if I'm going to go for it, then I might as well go for something big. What's the worst that I'm going to, get out of it? People are going to know who I am. As cliche as it sounds, I want to be known for my contributions to society. I don't want to be known for my wealth, because I have none. And that, for me, was the final thing, is that no matter how successful I've been, no matter how hard I've worked, how much I've given, opportunities I've provided to my children, at the end of the day, certain events are out of our control. And I found myself being just another regular person that's out of a job. And what are we going to do as a society to fix that, or to bring attention that it's not seldom just them, it's us. And accountability starts with us. So for me, it was that I have to lead the way. And I don't like the word leadership, because that's not what I consider myself. I want everyone to know that I'm just the regular Carlos. There's nothing special about me. And in doing so, I wanted to take my years of experience and show people that you don't need the millions of dollars. You don't need to be anybody special. All you got to do is just go for it. What's the worst? Right? Be passionate about something. Take pride and ownership. I think society has lost a lot of that. I have a problem with technology. I have a love-hate relationship with it because I'm an advocate because technology is a tool and it has improved our lives, but at the same time, the unintended consequences of instant gratification has led to a myriad of societal issues that we are experiencing today. So I don't want to be that person that talks bad about technology. I want to be the person that educates people and say, this is a tool, and this tool, information is going to help us succeed and progress in life. And that's pretty much it.
Thanks, Carlos. Yeah, no, that's impressive. Your experiences when you began at a young age and everything that you've gone through quite a lot. Then I think you kind of answer a lot of my questions, honestly. Like that was one of my questions I want to understand. Like, what influenced you to run for Senate for the Senate?
Right.
And I'm just trying to understand. But I mean, based off your experiences, being at the top at one point and losing it all and then getting back up, I think that sort of propelled you to get to the next level. What I wanted to know, maybe can you tell us a little bit about your party affiliation, a little bit about what are some goals that you see for the candidacy for the Senate seat? What are some of those goals that you that you have for 2022?
So I grew up in like the majority of Latinx in a Republican household. My sister was the only Democrat, and we used to get into heated debates. And I am a huge fan of George Herbert Walker, right? The first Bush. I thought he was one of the most qualified, mostly because he fit that conservative role and he kind of like stood for everything that it meant to be, American. I always tell people I got to the States when Bruce Springsteen was boss, GM was the largest employer, and rock and roll was in. People are surprised to know that I'm a Led Zeppelin fan. I'm rock and roll. So I've always had that. I want to be as American as possible, but I started to question, why am I a Republican? And then I started to analyze some of the fights that had happened with my sisters or discussions. As her as a Democrat, I said, well, why are you a Democrat? So when it came time to register, I registered as an independent, and I make no qualms about it. I vote on issues. I don't vote on party lines. I really don't care what your party is. Talk to me about what you want to do, how you're going to affect change, and that's it. I really don't care what party you're aligned. So I know it's political suicide to run as an independent. And I think one of the guys here in South Florida who's a big proponent of retire Rubio mentioned in one of his emails, all the fringe candidates, and even a well-known independent or something like that. But already the negativity, because you're not aligned to a party, I think is a problem. I think we need to go into politics not belonging to any party. If you really want to say that you're American, then there's America's America. Right? We're divided by two parties, but there's one America. And that for me, that is the premise of it. I also believe that there's too much money in politics. I think it needs to be capped. So one of the things that I wanted to do was to lead by example. I think too many talking heads. We used to be a society that judged people by their actions. We've become a society that judge people by their words. And everybody talks about getting back to the basics. And the basics for me is elementary. Don't judge a book by its cover. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and let your actions define who you are, not your words. In doing so, I ran across a problem when I tried to sign up for ActBlue. And they denied me. I said, we don't support if there's any other Democrat. And I'm like, here's a platform that is meant to raise money. There should be no bias. You should take anyone, but no. So I set out to find a platform that was independent, and it didn't exist. Right? I ran across a platform that is used in the software industry. So I decided to, one of the things about open source is I'm a huge advocate, is that you can clone that software. So I've been developing open political for about 6 months now. You know, I'm a one-man show, I'm self-taught, so it's taken me a little longer than expected. But the premise of it is that everything's going to be transparent. If I need to raise money for, let's say, a camera, you post what the camera costs, and then you post the money raised. It's literally like a budget. And you get to see exactly how that money is spent. Whether or not I win, whether or not I'm even a candidate that's viable, that alone, I think, will help solve a lot of the problems that we have, because everybody talks about transparency, but nobody wants to share where that money's coming from. So you can't speak to me about transparency if you're not willing to open books. And so the word open source, open, transparency, those have a profound meaning for me.
All right, thank you. Carlos, one question. You know, being part of South Florida, what are some of the Latino issues that are occurring at the moment? And what are some of your strategies that maybe that you want to tackle if you do become a senator, state senator?
I think the biggest thing for me is the information age, how we haven't used the information age for all good. So when you take a look at the misinformation that's going around and how quickly it spreads, that for me is the first thing that needs to be tackled, and that I would tackle. Other than that, as an engineer, I kind of consider myself an inherent engineer because I'm always deconstructing and building. Infrastructure is really big for me. And infrastructure obviously continues to be a problem in the US. Even here, we have bridges that are in disarray, roads, and you go further up north, that's a problem. And there's only one entity that can handle the expenditures of infrastructure, and that's the government. Because if we continue to depend on, private businesses to do it, it's just not going to happen. I think South Florida has one of the best experiences, and that is, Manny Medina at Mastec. He, at that time, in early 2000, he, created or started what was, I think, of the fourth or the fifth NAP, which is a network access point. All the NAPs before that were owned by the government. He dumped all his money into this, and it was supposed to bring all these jobs. Miami-Dade College dumped like $2 million in preparing this lab because it was going to educate all these people. It didn't do anything. And it didn't do anything because that was just one piece. All right, so he created the center, but what about the infrastructure to connect everyone to that center? So infrastructure is really big for me because I think there's a lot of things that we need to fix, that we need to crawl before we run. Other than that, healthcare, because I was involved in healthcare, there's still a lot of issues in healthcare with fraud and abuse that technology can help solve. And if we don't start to accept technology as a good thing and constantly see it as the monster, then we're never going to get there. Other than that, the technology and infrastructure investments are going to create jobs. Right? The consolidation that happened when we started to outsource, to cheaper labor is, directly correlated to the wage stagnation that we're seeing. And when you consider where I live in Miami, you can't buy a home here, and you live in Miami, yeah, but 5-bedroom home here is, and depending on the neighborhood, $500,000 to a couple $1 million. And when you take a look at the median wage, who can afford that? So what is progress? I know what it was like in the 80s when it was, you lived with your family, but it was your tia, your primo, because we couldn't afford to live anywhere else. And somehow we're like right back to that. We're no longer single family, we're multifamily. So if we don't address infrastructure, healthcare, and my last thing is education, then we're not going to progress. That's just the bottom line. That to me is integral.
Can we focus a little bit on education on that end? What are some issues? Well, because we know there's a shortage as well of instructors and different people that are working within the education system. There's a shortage. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what is going on?
Well, first and foremost, we don't give teachers the credit that they deserve. They are the true heroes. So if we want to shorten the shortage of teachers, because it's been a crisis, and I talk about this on my website, we need to pay them more. This is just plain and simple. We need to be able to provide teachers a living wage. We've cut so many programs that I enjoyed as a kid that gave me the opportunity to really take a look at my public education, and it was really good. But teachers were a different breed now. Now, back then, you compare them to today they're struggling. You send your child to school and they come back with this list, and it's like, bring paper, bring sanitizer, bring this, bring that. That's a burden on the teacher. And we've gone now from what maybe used to be 20, 30 kids back from when I went to school to now 34, 35 kids. That to me is unacceptable. And if we don't, as a society, address the requirements that are needed in education, then again, if you can't educate people, then we're never going to get over the biases and the ignorance that continues to spread. So definitely salaries for the teachers need to be increased. We need to increase a lot of the social programs. I think lunches for kids should be free. I think that once we get past that and we get into high school and beyond, then my position has always been that if the workforce requires a minimum education, at this point being a bachelor's, then the value of that bachelor's isn't what it used to be anymore, because that's your minimum requirement. So if the minimum requirement is a bachelor's, then at a bare minimum, we should be providing that education for free. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to send everybody to MIT, but there's plenty of community colleges. Even making community college free for everyone is going to change things. I posted something yesterday that Emory University did a study where $1 an hour more on people's paychecks decreased suicides by an estimated 13,000. That's a very significant number. It's 13,000 people that can take their lives. But the profound effect that has on families and society, is tenfold. That's just an hour. So, I could talk about this for hours, but definitely if we don't invest, then we're never going to get anywhere. And the budget cuts haven't progressed. This isn't progression. This is regression.
Carlos, what can we do with our healthcare system? What are some issues within the healthcare system, and what can be done?
Wow, how much time you got for that one? The biggest thing for me is technology. So I was privileged to work for the regional extension centers as a subject matter expert during the implementation of electronic health records. And what I discovered, this was after my tenure in healthcare, what I discovered was that the abuse was still there. So the program at that point in time was providing physicians, the Medicaid physicians, up to, I believe it was $60,000 through a 5-year period to take that money, invest in technology. And there are doctors that literally, and I'm the government expert that's coming in to help you fill out that paperwork so you can get that money, telling me I'm going to Hawaii with this money. They didn't invest it in technology. Now, the problem doesn't come in the law or the vehicle to go after that, because the OIG, Office of Inspector General, clearly knew that this was a problem. And if you take a look at the majority of times that the system has been abused, the Office of Inspector General has always said, before it becomes a national, media circus, that this was going to happen. Let me tell you what we did here in Florida. When they created the task force, we discovered that for every dollar we invested into that task force, we got 7 in return. Now, again, you don't have to have an MBA to know that that's one hell of a return on your money. Well, when they went and they asked for more, it was turned down. So I don't understand how that happens. And I can tell you how that happens is because we as a society uphold this mantra that no news is good news. It's the hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. And a lot of the Latinx, because of the countries that we come from, there's no trust in government. So they'll tell you, I don't pay attention to that. Well, especially when I was in healthcare. Well, what do you mean you don't pay attention to it? Yeah, that doesn't affect me. Well, last I checked, there's a Medicare deduction on your paycheck. It does affect you. So if we could take the technology that already exists to increase some of the programs that the Office of Inspector General has already said are successful, why aren't we doing it? All right, why is that not being done? And then the talking heads get up there and they say, oh, we're law and order, we're law and order. But white collar crime continues. Oh, take a look at the Panama Papers, all the tax havens, right? I mean, I hate to talk about Trump, but how did this guy get away for 15 years of dodging taxes like that? You know, I don't understand it, but I've been able to see it. And because of healthcare, how many times enforcement is turned down. So that goes into the point that every government resource is always done like at a bare minimum. If we set a division up, they give them scraps from the table. It's never properly funded. So because it's never properly funded, for one reason or another, it fails. So they're set up to fail. And we need to take a better look at why we continue to do that, because it's never going to get any better. I mean, at the time that I was put out of business, Cuomo was the attorney general. He sued United Healthcare. That year after, it was found that the attorney was backdating stock options, right? This guy got, I think, a 4 or 5 year prison sentence for what he had done. And this is one guy. United Healthcare, a lot of people will tell you they don't remember, founded Ingenix. Ingenix was a clearinghouse for medical billing. All the claims went into this one computer, let's put it like that. That system was purposely denying claims. Purposely denying claims. Now, that's why Cuomo brought the suit. They brought the suit because of a whistleblower. And even after they settled, it was alleged that it was over $1 billion in profits by just denying those claims. So even with the $10 million fine, that was nothing compared to what they got away with. And when you talk to some of the investigators, they'll tell you that they've known about this, you know? And every time they go to the superiors, well, we don't have the resources, we don't have the resources, we don't have the resources. And then for decades, it goes on, and literally it's costing all of us, right? Because take a look at what insurance rates are now. So that to me is a big, big problem.
Thank you, Carlos. I believe my colleague, Bryanne, would like to ask you a question.
Sure.
Thank you, Carlos. So while we're on the topic of healthcare, I wanted to ask you, how do you see the management of healthcare moving forward? And I'm thinking specifically because during COVID-19, Latinos were one of the groups that were hardest hit by the pandemic. So how do you foresee us better managing our communities, protecting them specifically in times of crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic, but also even after or before?
So regional extension centers have existed. They were started back in agriculture for farmers. And the purpose of a regional extension center was to basically educate, right? It was the outreach to provide the education on the resources and say that these are available. That's a tool that we as a government have available that isn't used. The last time it was used was for the HITECH Act, which was where, part of the program that I worked on, which was for the electronic health records. That is a very valuable resource, because I can tell you that the biggest problem right now is education. Right? And why is education a problem? Is because people just don't have the time, especially in the Latinx community. I go back to when my mom and dad were working. What time did they have? I was a latchkey kid. That's still going on today. All right. So it's not that they're uneducated, it's that there's no time for that. So we as a society have the tool of the regional extension centers to create the outreach, to get into the underdeserved neighborhoods, to let people know that this is available. Now, other than that, I can tell you from coming from a state that has a high Medicaid populace, giving people health care reduces our cost in the long run. So all this, all this fear factor that they push about, socialize this, socialize that, no, quite the contrary. Because if we're able to provide regular health care, primary care, it's going to lower the cost of people going into an emergency room, right? Where some of the visits for emergency rooms, I think one of the statistics was heart attacks, 50% of them ended up being heartburn or something else, right? That costs money. And ultimately, that cost doesn't go to the hospital. It's not the insurance company. It gets passed back onto us. And that, for me, there's enough evidence to prove that providing healthcare, right, is going to change that significantly.
Thank you, Carlos. I have a question moving towards more immigration. Maybe if you could tell us a little bit about what are your thoughts on immigration, maybe detention centers. Florida is one of the biggest places with the industrial complex prison systems. What's your input on that?
Anything that's an industrial complex right there, like that already for me is a problem, right? Because that's where it was Lord Acton who said power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. The prison system, detention centers like that, we can fund detention centers, but we can't fund the resources to get more people through the system. So that's a systemic failure. So you're going to hear me say that a lot, systemic failure. So how do we fix that? Well, instead of funding detention centers, why don't we fund, right, the people that are going to process people appropriately, right? That is the first thing, is the disdain for immigrants when this country was founded on immigration. I think speaks volumes of where society is, kind of chomping at the wrong bit and feeding into, what I like to refer to as reefer madness, this hysteria. Unfortunately, Black and brown have always been painted as the boogeyman. And the only way that we're going to change that is by providing the resources to our government. And I know that saying those things kind of immediately draws the ire of, oh my God, this guy wants socialism. No, I don't want socialism. Because we have laws and we have a system. And in order for that system to work, it needs to be funded properly. It's just like any other mechanism, any other vehicle. If it's not treated right, if it's not maintained, if it's not managed, it's going to fail. And everything that is going on in the government right now is failing and has failed. And we need to accept the fact that that's a fact, right? Reagan was 40 years ago. Reaganomics, trickle-down economics, it was a failure. Yet you still have some people that are somehow under the assumption that it was successful. But the only thing that trickle-down economics was successful at was trickling down debt, right? So when we talk about how are we going to provide opportunities, then what's the system in place? When all we're doing is instead of providing opportunities, we're locking people up, holding them, and not doing anything with them other than feeding that institution that doesn't give us any benefit whatsoever. None. So that's a big problem right there for me.
All right. I'm thinking right now, and I'm actually thinking of considering another segment of the population, which are farm workers. We have definitely a lot of farm workers in homestead areas and moving up to Immokalee and other areas in Florida. How would you be reaching out to that community, those communities in particular? Do you have any plans when talking and discussing about rural Florida? What are some ideas that you would like to do in those communities?
Absolutely. Well, again, regional extension centers were created specifically for agriculture. And Florida being a huge agriculture place, something that we don't use. Now, getting back to immigrants have fueled the economy. And providing an opportunity for someone to work and not be concerned if someone's going to knock on the door and take them away, that's a problem. Because what you're doing is you're subjugating that person. You're controlling them by fear. And by controlling that person and subjugating that person, you're not fostering any growth. Right? So in order for us to improve in agriculture, we need to let our workers know that they're safe, and we're going to provide opportunities for them to get better. Because here's an argument that I always get into with people: the working class is always going to spend their money. That's just it, right? Because there's always a part of society, of the realm that we're trying to aspire to reach. So we may have I started washing dishes at Red Lobster as your typical immigrant. Did I want to be a dishwasher for the rest of my life? No. But I knew that I had to start somewhere. But I wasn't treated with the disdain that immigrants are being treated as today. Even though we did, my family did face, but I find it profoundly ironic that 40 years later, it's worse than what it was. And it's sometimes the same that what my parents experienced. And that needs to change, because everybody comes to this country for opportunities. Nobody comes here, because I'm going to take, advantage of the system and be a freeloader. No one's going to risk their life to do that. No one's going to take that trek, just to come in here and sit on a couch and do that. No, they're coming here because they know that this is the country where if you work hard enough, you are going to be able to succeed. So we need to be able to let people know that they're going to be safe, that we are going to provide them an opportunity. But in order to do that, we need to do it in a legal way. And that we can't do that if we don't have the resources to even fund the people that are going to process them accordingly.
Thank you, Carlos. This is more of a personal question, but what are you proud as a Latinx resident in Florida?
What am I proudest of?
Yeah. As a Latino, being a Latino, what are you proud of?
I think the resilience, no matter what, right? And that just, I guess, because we come from hardship, that we're going to face adversity. And I'm not saying that we're the only ones to do that. But I think the fact that because we come from a country where there's so much oppression, that we appreciate the liberties. Right? I always tell people I consider myself more American apple pie than a lot of the people here, because I appreciate the opportunities that this country has given me. I mean, where else, could an uneducated immigrant have the opportunity to do what I'm doing? People say that, it's hard here. Yeah, absolutely, it's hard. It doesn't come easy. But the Latin community is definitely known that when, we're coming here to work. And it's going to be hard, but we're going to do it, and if we have to start washing dishes, then we're going to do it. And we can't continue to denigrate that at all.
Thank you, Carlos. What is the Florida that you want to see in 10 years, let's say? What is the vision of the future of Florida for you?
A place that's affordable for my kids to have a good life, I often joke that I worked hard, not to live paycheck to paycheck. Now I live direct deposit to direct deposit, right? And that's a problem. That's a problem. And it concerns me, because I know how angry that made me and how much that anger fueled the bad decisions for me and the profound effect that those bad decisions had on my life. So I don't want that for anyone, right? And that's the kind of future that I want to see. Now, I'm not talking about this melancholy world, right? Because that's never going to exist. But to know that you can work, come home, afford things, and not be constantly dealt with that worry that I'm one paycheck away from losing everything. That's not life. So it's going to take a lot of work. It's definitely not an easy task, but I do feel that we have reached a very cataclysmic point in life. I always say that the Mayans miscalculated when they said the world was changing in 2012. If you take a look at 1 to 2 degrees of variation, 2020 was a very pivotal moment in the world for all of us. I think a lot of us, were forced, but to take a good look at, what was more important. And now that we're here at that point, we need to act. We can't just sit and wait for others to do that. Obviously the quote, don't ask what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. That means a lot to me, because that's really where it starts. And if you don't have any pride in ownership, if you're not willing, to get into the game, then what are you really doing?
That's right. Carlos, I have a question. You're running against Democrats, Republicans. I guess you could use this opportunity to say, like, how can you get those people to vote for you? Maybe some, turn around some of those people that might be Republicans and go to the other party. Like, what would you tell those that are listening, viewing this clip? What message would you say to them?
So I've stopped arguing on Facebook because it's an exercise in futility. But the minute anyone starts a conversation and, the Democrats this, no. First of all, let's remove labels. Let's talk about the issues. Then we can talk about what party you belong to. So if we can focus on a conversation of the issues, now what party you belong to, then we can make progress, because we'll realize that at the end of the day, male or female, we all put our pants on one leg at a time. That's not changing, right? And maybe you live in Coconut Grove and maybe you live in Homestead. But the bottom line is we still get up to do the same thing. And that is provide a better life for ourselves and for our families, regardless of what party we belong to. So I want to stick to that. Let's stick to the conversation about issues, not what party you belong to, because there's too much partisan divide that is responsible for the gridlock. And that's not progress. That's not how we're going to progress. So I hope that people can forget the labels. Like one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that we teach our children, from the minute that they're able to recognize and put thoughts together, is not to judge a book by its cover. But we as a society, this is what we incessantly do. If you don't belong to a party, then you're not I don't want to listen to you. No, I really don't care what party you belong to. Let's talk about the issues.
Thank you, Carlos. Well, I think I've already done the questions that I had for you for the day, but is there anything else that you might want to add? You have the opportunity to do it right now. Maybe a message to the people any type of message, please.
Stop waiting for people to fix things, right? Take pride and ownership, get involved, because whether you think so or not, this does affect you and everyone around you. And I think the framers kind of encompassed everything in 3 little words. We, the people, together as a collective union, will form a better future, not only for us, but for the generation after us. And if we focus on that message, I think we can do it.
All right, Carlos. Bryanne, do you have any questions or?
No, I don't, but I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Barberena, for your time, for sharing your story with us. It's very inspiring, and I think a lot of Latinos can relate to it.
Thank you. And Carlos, no Mr. Barberena, just Carlos, please.
All right, Carlos. Well, that will conclude the interview for today, but I'll just stop right now the recording.